when we interact with other people in the world, some people are going to say that kids need to be exposed to many different things outside what the Torah has to say. If you ask them why, they say, well, they need to know, kids need to know, we adults need to know that there's a whole world of choices out there, and a person has other choices besides doing what God Almighty wants. So the answer is, first of all, within Torah itself, we already know that we have those choices, because God Almighty only commands us to do something or not to do something when it's something that's within our choice. And therefore, if something's commanded to us not to do something, God Almighty in His loving divine guidance is saying, don't do this, my dear child, then we know that we have the option to do that. So there's no shortage of availability of the possibility of doing something that's not in our own best interest. But then a person is going to say, well, the next argument they make is, well, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference what a person's going to do. And the answer is, it makes a big difference. Why is it relevant to me? It's relevant to me what another person chooses, and it should be relevant to you what I choose, because it has an effect on all of us. And before we get to that argument, by the way, we have to see that one of the big mistakes that people make is they say when they choose to do whatever they want, they don't see any immediate negative consequences. So therefore, they say that shows us that there's no consequences. But what that's doing is taking God Almighty's divine loving kindness to us to constantly give us a chance to get back on track, and turning on its head and saying that the God Almighty's compassion for us is a proof of His non-existence, or the insignificance to Him of our actions, or that there's no consequences to our actions. The reality is that when we do something that's not in our own best interest, there is often a delayed play out of the consequences, because God Almighty in His divine compassion is saying to us, I want to give you another chance. So we have to see that the delayed reaction between what we choose to do and the consequences is a sign of love for us and sign of God Almighty's presence, rather than getting caught up in the tricks and the trade of Amalek and those that wish to try to confuse us, and thinking, oh, well, since there's no consequence, I can't measure consequence in an immediate sense, then there's no lightning bolt that comes down. The lack of a lightning bolt is because of God Almighty's divine compassion. But the truth is that there are consequences to our actions, and they play out over time. And our job is to see and anticipate those consequences and realize that those consequences are things that are told to us by the Torah. The Torah tells us what's going to happen, and the disarray and the conflict and the collapse within our own lives. So let's just take an example. If a person decides, God forbid, that he's not going to get married and have children, bring new human beings created in God Almighty's divine image into the world, if he decides that he's not going to do that, he's not going to devote his divine energy to bringing and raising upright children, then the consequence is, well, what's the consequence? The consequence is that it becomes extinct. He goes out of existence. So instead of eliminating his life over 1 minute, God forbid, he's eliminating his life over 70 years, that at the end of his life, there is no progeny, there's no continuation of his physical life, and as a consequence, because he chose to do something that is against God Almighty's divine will, and he didn't use his time in this world for bringing more divine image into the world, then there's a consequence that to his soul also, that there's a lack of physical eternity and there's a lack of spiritual eternity. So there's definitely a consequence. Now, that doesn't mean that he can't go around in this world in the 70 years and he could say, oh, he has more free time, he has more time to do what he wants, and he doesn't have the responsibilities of being married and having children, and the challenges that come with that, and that's all true. But the consequence is self-evident for itself, that he goes extinct. So we have to see that these are the consequences. So now the argument then comes up, well, okay, so there's consequences, but why is it my business what he decides to do in his time? Why should it be your business what I do in my own energy in my own time? And the answer is because if there is one human being that chooses not to replicate himself and to reproduce himself and bring him more upright human beings into the world, then that is a disaster for all of us. That's a disaster for all of us. It's a consequence for all of us. He's practicing a misguided idea. He's practicing a form of idolatry to put ahead his own needs, ahead of what God Almighty's vision is, and the needs of the rest of humanity. We need more people like him. Whoever he is, even if he's making all the wrong choices right now, and he's aligned with the wrong ideologies, and he's even maybe seems to be completely committed to the wrong things and the wrong results, but God Almighty intends for him, in his loving kindness, God Almighty intends for him to make the right choices in the next moment, and to bring more beautiful human beings into the world, to bring more beauty into the world, and more divine image into the world. So there's a consequence for me. If one person doesn't come into the world, then my world is diminished. The world is diminished from the lack of that person that needs to come into the world, and the contribution that person is going to make. And every person has a unique contribution, meaning to say, it's the lie of the utilitarian and the philosophies and the Enlightenment philosophies that there's certain Platonic philosophies, there's certain people that make bigger contributions to society than other contributions to society. And that's a falsehood that the Torah refutes. The Torah says that we need everybody. We need the people that are the levels to be the kings and the big scholars, and we also need people that are the levels of being the wood choppers and the water carriers, not just because for a utilitarian reason that we need wood chopped and we need water carried, but because the guy who chops the wood and the guy who carries the water, he has something unique to contribute, not from his productivity, but from his existence. His existence is something that's bringing something beautiful and important and absolutely essential that my life needs, and your life needs what I have to offer. Each person has what to offer. So it does make a difference what we choose to do. And therefore, we can take this encouraging message to every single human being and let them know that yes, there are consequences to our actions, and the consequences are laid out for us. The Torah lays it out for us, and the Torah lovingly reminds us that God Almighty is creating us. He's within us. He is examining our hearts and our entire internal organs to see if we're serving God Almighty with joy and with love, and we are intending to help increase the incredible mission of life, and particularly of human life, but life in general in this existence, and both the spiritual life and the physical life. And God Almighty is giving us the energy for that, and he's eagerly anticipating us getting on track with his program, because he's giving us the life for that. So God bless you all, and take this message today to do something to uplift yourselves and encourage another person to be willing and excited about increasing his life, the expression of divine energy in his life, to bring every human being to the recognition that there's nothing besides God Almighty, and that we are all here working together to bring about the ultimate fulfillment of God Almighty's creation, which is that there'll be an incredibly massive number of human beings, 80 billion to start, and that each one of those 80 billion people is going to bring new, great divine wisdom to the world in an unlimited way, and be a wellspring of divine wisdom. And may we experience that now with the coming Mashiach and the redemption of the entire world. Amen.